Welcome to Beyond the Frame, a show by SOCA Global Outreach Office, sharing the new, the now, and the necessary, in a digest of thought-provoking news and tidbits from the global art world, with a particular focus on marginalized voices. We bring you news and stories centered around equity, inclusivity, and sustainability, exploring the places where art is urgent, political, and current, while reflecting on the complexities of today's world. Let's start with the news. Today's show is a bit more serious than usual as it deals with a lot of current events. And if you've peeked at the news lately, first and foremost, we look at the massive earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Aside from the tragic human toll, Art Forum and other news sites have reported that the quakes damaged some significant cultural heritage sites. In particular, the Gaziantep Castle, home to a collection of art and relics from the Turkish War of Independence in the 1920s. Many other mosques and other sites were damaged, at least one of which was a UNESCO World Heritage Site. 3 other UNESCO heritage sites also reportedly sustained damage. As they often have in the past, the arts have provided a path for recovery, either through awareness or fundraising. The efforts have only begun, but one arts show is already taking steps forward. Arts Dubai, whose 16th edition opens in the first week of March, has announced that it will donate 50% of online ticket sales to earthquake recovery. While these countries, especially Syria, are often ignored by the West, this is hopefully only the first of many efforts for recovery using the arts. From one conflict area to another, we now turn our attention to Ukraine and the Russian-Ukraine war. But rather than look at the destruction of heritage sites, we look at how politics and conflict can have a ripple effect in many other areas you wouldn't necessarily expect. An article in the Arts newspaper reports that U.S. authorities have subpoenaed auction houses in an effort to cut down on violations of Russian sanctions. Purchasing, selling, and hiding art could be ways that individuals can get around international sanctions, professional sanctions evaders, as they are called. And these investigations are looking into top auction houses to ensure that they are following the list of sanctioned people. In a previous episode, I talked about the removal of cultural heritage and art during war, and that is the topic of an investigation by the Art newspaper around the collections of the Kherson Regional Art Museum, which were removed by Russian troops in occupied Ukraine and sent to Simferopol in Crimea, a territory Russia claimed in 2014. While those on the Russian side claim it was for safekeeping to protect them during the fighting, there is legitimate concern that the paintings will never be returned. The full report of the Art newspaper digs into this and notes that the removal of culture is officially a war crime, a charge that the Kherson police may consider in this case. But it's not just the areas on the front lines of the war that are affected. Anti-Russian sentiment has grown around the world. New York art school Cooper Union, for example, recently delayed an exhibition of Russian art in response. However, a group of artists and architects were uncomfortable with this and prepared a missive that questioned how a school of Moscow art from a century ago could be blamed for the current situation and raised the issue of censorship. The exhibition will be opened with an accompanying statement. It is important to note that even in the midst of conflict, it is important not to blame those who have nothing to do with the conflict in retribution. And finally, in a slightly more hopeful article, Freeze.com features a Ukrainian poet working to use his art to help Ukrainian migrants in Poland. From using the Warsaw Museum of Modern Art as a meeting place for supporting immigrants, to developing his own performance and poetry practice to raise awareness. The piece shows how art can be a powerful meeting place and platform for good in tough times. From Russia, we move slightly west, where the art world is also feeling the impact of Brexit. From museum staff striking across the UK to protest low pay raises in the face of high inflation, to reports in Artsy how Brexit has impacted the UK art market in a variety of ways. The overall economic situation has left many artists struggling. Two of the largest and most well-known art fairs, Masterpiece London and the Art and Antiques Fair Olympia, were cancelled, though two of the original founders of Masterpiece London have since announced a replacement fair entitled London Summer Art Fair. And finally, while it may or may not have to do with Brexit directly, the 25 artists living in the Zona Mista studios in London, where they have been based for 10 years and conducted numerous exhibitions with high-profile artists, recently received a sudden eviction notice from the owners. The owners claim negotiations were unsuccessful. The artists claim that they never took place, and that the owners demanded a 68% increase in rent. The owners have given only a 7-day notice to leave the premises, which in the current climate and with the extra expenses that moving artwork would take is devastating. That is a lot of heavy stuff to deal with, so let's move on to a few trends. I found an interesting article in Artsy which featured top curators predicting what will be the top trends this year. Many curators touched on some of the trends and ideas I've talked about in the 3 previous episodes, and how artists of color and narratives that challenge the dominant understanding of the world and Indigenous art will continue to become more important and drive the conversations, while artists that push the boundaries of genre and medium, such as many Latin American artists are doing, will continue to rise. Of course, digital arts, including immersive arts, video games, and AI, are also mentioned. As the art world grows in accessibility and inclusion, it will be fascinating to see how the landscape changes and grows. Now let's turn to our featured artist section. This episode we are looking at Japanese-American artist Miya Ando. I chose this artist because of an article I saw in White Hot magazine about a project entitled Waiting for the Moon, a series of drawings the artist made while watching the moon outside her window during the pandemic. This resonated with me personally, as I used to spend nights during the pandemic talking to the moon as well, and I never really understood the phases of the moon until I watched it every night. This connection sparked an interest in the artist, as well as her focus on nature and capturing natural phenomena through scientific and philosophical perspectives. Part of Ando's contemplative side comes from her upbringing. Her father was a head priest at a Buddhist temple in Japan. Her grandmother matched her kimonos to the 72 pentad ancient calendar system, giving her an understanding of the subtle changes in the seasons. Throughout her work, Ando calls on the viewer to think more deeply on the rhythm of nature and its passage, finding a bridge in the disparate, disconnected times. Her family are also traditional Japanese bizen sword makers, and this understanding of metal also shows in her work, with peaceful yet evocative metal paintings. Ando has exhibited around the world with many solo exhibitions, including at the 56th Vienna Biennale. She was commissioned to create a 30-foot tall sculpture built from the World Trade Center steel installed in the Olympic Park in London to mark the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. It's really interesting. I was attracted to Ando's work just by the inspiration of drawing the moon every day for several weeks. But I find all her work, which includes sculpture, metal paintings, and more, to be absolutely fascinating and beautiful. I absolutely recommend you to check out her work. Now we're almost at the end of today's episode, so let's talk about a few tidbits before wrapping up. First up, the Pentagon has finally released a ban on releasing art made by prisoners at Guantanamo Bay when they leave. You wouldn't think of art in places like prisons and jails, but there are so many examples of how art brings life and healing into these dark places. Detainees have fought a long time to bring their art with them, so this policy change is a big step, though the US government still does claim the copyright. The issue is, as you can imagine, fraught and complicated, and many questions and caveats remain, but this is one step in the right direction. Secondly, a Kandinsky painting which was recently returned to the heirs of its original owner, a Jewish German who was killed in Auschwitz in 1944, is now going up for auction at Sotheby's. The painting is expected to reach $45 million selling price, and the proceeds will be divided among the owner's 13 descendants, with some extra devoted to researching the rest of the owner's extensive art collection scattered during the war. And finally, the Louvre has decided to limit the number of daily visitors in an attempt to create a more pleasurable viewing experience. In the years before COVID, the famous museum accepted 45,000 visitors per day and has now decided to sell only 30,000 tickets per day, a number on par with attendance from 17 years ago. Viewers have complained of overcrowding, particularly in the Gioconde, where the Mona Lisa is exhibited, and this policy is meant to help promote a more relaxed atmosphere. I wonder if the second-hand ticket market will jump, but it's always nice to have more space in a museum. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching Beyond the Frame by SOCA Global Outreach Office. See you next time!